Welcome to this episode of the Story Geeks. I am filling in for Mr. Jay Sherer. We are comparing Elementall and Toy Story this time in part 2 of what makes a great Pixar film. Up next, I got Evan and the Italiano Citrus George. Welcome back, everybody. Let's rock and roll. Welcome to the Story Geeks, hosted by Jay Sherer, except not today. It's hosted by OG55. I am filling in for Jay today, but he will be back. But just today I'm just filling in. George, welcome back to the show, brother. If you could let everybody at home know where they could find you on social media.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on the podcast, A Walk with Walt. You can now find me on Instagram at the Disney Italiano. And of course, you'll find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner, with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
Perfect. Welcome back, George. And returning to the show is Evan. Evan, it's always a good time having you on. Thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, glad to be back. It's like we never left, guys.
Exactly.
Part 2, we have never left. We just stayed in the same place for 2 weeks, and now we're back. I'm excited. This was a good topic. I had so much fun covering, the differences between Lightyear and what was the other movie we talked about? WALL-E. Yeah, it was Lightyear and WALL-E last time. And we have some new movies this time around. I'm excited to dig in to see the nuances of Pixar and everything in between.
Absolutely.
And that's why Jay couldn't join us today. We were just sitting for so long, his legs cramped up.
Exactly. And then, Evan, if you could just remind everybody where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, if I'm on Twitter, Harris EV9. I've been having a blast on other podcasts. I've been enjoying this Halloween season. I've been watching some movies for the first time. Like, for example, I watched The Mist for the first time last night. We did a commentary about that, and I was not expecting that ending. So if you want to watch The Mist with who I watched it with Edgar and I, again, follow me at Harris EV9. It was a fun time.
Absolutely. So check him out. I will link all of his socials in the description down below. Show some love to Evan. Subscribe and follow wherever you can find him down below. So let's go ahead and dive in. So last time we did this Pixar video, we covered most of these, but we I think we're down to like 15 now. So we have about 7 left. And but this time we're not going to do Lightyear and we're not going to do WALL-E. We're going to be comparing Elementall with Toy Story. Okay, so we're going to be applying what are the 22 rules of storytelling according to Pixar. All right. Now, if those of you at home, if you've not seen part 1, I definitely suggest you do so and come back to this one. But let's go ahead and dive right in. We got number 15. So if you were a character in this situation, how would you feel? Honesty lends credibility to unbelievable situations. Evan, I'll start with you. In terms of Elementall, in terms of Toy Story, if you were one of these characters in this situation, how would you feel? Did both of these films do a good job at sort of putting the audience in these certain positions? Did one do better than the other? What's your take on this?
Well, first off, I think both these movies did this part really well. And I like this rule because it's a very important rule in storytelling. If your movie, your project, your TV show, whatever you're writing, if it's not immersive, then there's kind of an issue there. There's like an out-of-body experience that you're having in regards to like this fictional tale here. So it's very important for your story to get the audience inserted into your story. How do you feel about certain characters? Your emotions, for better or for worse, should be heightened with the story that you're telling. Whether it's a rom-com in Elementall's case, or whether it's just an average, awesome Pixar movie in Toy Story's case. I think, for example, in Toy Story, if you were your character, if you were any character, I would say, in the first Toy Story, how would you feel about the situation? How would you feel about Buzz coming in and ruining like the feng shui of Andy's house? Like, how would you feel about all of that? Like, having your characters or having the audience really kind of feel for the characters. Like for me, for example, whenever I watch Toy Story now these days, it's a very interesting experience because when I first watched it when I was a kid, I was like, oh yeah, Woody's cool. Like Woody's doing all these things. Buzz is cool. I love all these guys. Now I'm watching it and I'm like, Woody, you're an a-hole. I can't stand Woody in the first Toy Story movie. He hates Buzz from jump for no reason. And that's not a bad thing. That's just who Woody is. And granted, I don't like a lot of the decisions Woody makes in the first movie, but that's not a bad thing in terms of storytelling. I like getting my emotions heightened. I like being involved in the story and seeing how these characters are really interacting with different characters in the mix. Um, so overall, again, I like this last part where it says honesty leads credibility to unbelievable situations. That's a very big point for Pixar. A lot of these situations are unbelievable, kind of like out supernatural, out of the ordinary, especially in Elemental stages where this is a world of emotions. Like, how do you get your audience to be immersed in a story about not emotions, sorry, but just elements? How do you get your audience immersed in a story about different elements mixing and not mixing? I think it does a good job by creating these very, how do you say, like human characteristics for these elements here. Where Ember is a very natural woman going through like difficulties with her family. Wade going through his job, but also finds Ember attractive, and then just also kind of like interact amongst like their young adult kind of vibes here, kind of like a romantic sense here. Again, these are things that audiences can naturally relate to, especially along the romantic sense. That kind of immerses themselves into the story. So I think both of these stories do this in a remarkable and unique way.
100%, Evan. And George, what are your thoughts on this? On creating a situation where your audience can sort of relate or connect with the characters. Do you think both of these films do a good job at that, or what was
Absolutely, I agree with Evan on that. I feel like that's where Elemental for me kind of falls back to Pixar's roots, with where these characters are relatable to its generalized audience. Whether you're a child, you're an adult, you'll find something in these characters that are very relatable, even though it's not kind of like throwing it in your face to say, okay, you have to feel this sort of way about this character, or you have to feel about this sort of way in this situation. It's like they kind of throw it in there where it's like a smoke screen, so to speak, where it's just like it's there, and it's how each individual wants to interpret it. And actually, I kind of take Elemental and Toy Story in some similarities, but different situations. Where with Ember and Wade, it's more of a sort of like a love story between two characters, of how that you would think that they'd never be compatible, but they find a way. Where with Toy Story, it's a buddy flick. You have these two characters that you would think, Buzz Lightyear is the brand new space toy. Woody is the kind of like the old kind of classic vintage toy, sort of like being in high school where you have like the nerd and the jock, coming together, and it's like you never think they would, but you could find compatibility in that sense. And that's where I find Toy Story and Elemental kind of in that same shoebox, so to speak.
That's an interesting perspective, George, where you said like the opposites sort of connect, right? Like, so obviously with Elemental, you have fire and water, which is very much an obvious, opposite. But even like with Woody and Buzz, very different. You have this little cowboy, old school cowboy, and you got this new high tech, Ranger. So that's cool. I like that. I like how you take these characters that are very, very different, and you put them in circumstances and situations where they connect and they bond, right? So, and that's one of the things I really loved about. I actually just watched Elemental today. Full disclosure, before we started recording this, and I absolutely fell in love with this movie. I think the messaging in this movie is really, really fantastic. We talked a lot last week. We touched upon how sometimes messaging can seem kind of forced. Sometimes it doesn't feel right, contrived. I felt it really worked in this movie, right? It makes sense that a little fire girl and a water boy wouldn't be compatible. That's like common sense. It felt very organic in that this would be a problem. And I think that it for the audience, I think it's relatable because everyone has situations in their life where maybe, look, I was in a relationship for a long time, over 10 years. And she was Vietnamese, different culture than me, So we came from two very different backgrounds. She actually wasn't even born here. She came here when she was like a teenager. So very rooted in her Vietnamese culture. I'm, this white dude from California, right? Very different backgrounds, but we came together and we learned about each other and each other's backgrounds and grew to love each other, right? And I feel like I could relate personally to this story because it's these two separate things coming together, and despite being so different and coming from two totally different worlds, they end up meeting and finding each other. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful love story. And Toy Story is interesting too. Toy Story is it kind of reminds me actually of like an office, like someone's job, right? Like you have like these core set of like coworkers, right? You all work together. You know what you got to do. You're all friends. You go to happy hour after work. You got this connection, but then the new person comes in, and it's like, ooh, how is this person going to fit in now with our little clique, right? And a lot of people in your little clique might be like the Woody, like everyone was talking about. Like, you might dislike this person from the jump because it's the new person, or maybe someone feels threatened or whatever, insecure. So, I think people can relate to these kind of circumstances. I agree with both of you gentlemen. I think both movies do an excellent job at showcasing it. So fantastic storytelling all around.
Real quick, I just want to reference that. Like, I like how last week we talked about Lightyear, which is one of the more not as critically well-received movies from Pixar, comparing it to WALL-E, which was a super well-received Pixar movie, one of the highest rated of all the Pixar movies. And now we're doing Toy Story, which was the very first Pixar movie, in Elementall, which is now the very most recent Pixar movie. And I like the dichotomy here because Toy Story, very well received from the jump, and it kind of started it all. We wouldn't be talking about Elementall if it wasn't for Toy Story. And Elementall had a very interesting reception where it came out. People were like so on it, but then more and more people saw it. The rating critically went up, and box office wise, it went up more and more as time went on. So I think it's a very interesting test to where Pixar started, which was like hot, and then now Elementall, which started off like not so great, but like slowly recovering. And it's interesting because last week we were talking about like this modern era of Pixar and what's really going on here. And I think Elementall is a good litmus for like where the audience is in modern times is with Pixar, where they're like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And they came to theater, they supported it because the audiences are still there for Pixar. They're still there for Elementall. And I like that whole interesting state of affairs where we're at with Pixar.
Well said.
And hopefully like this continues. Moving into next year.
Yeah, no, I hope so too. It seems like Elementall really had incredible legs because it started off kind of soft, right? The box office, but then it just kept going. Like it just kept it was doing solid weekends, like weekend after weekend after weekend. And I think a lot of that is just, people were going out to see it and maybe they were telling their friends, hey, this is a really cute movie. Check it out, So it maintained, and I think it ultimately did decent at the end of the day. Like I think it made its money back. It wasn't like a huge thing, but I think it did pretty okay,
Yeah, it's interesting because and one of the main issues we talk about with movies in general these days, like this, their budgets. Like Elementall costs $200 million, which is astonishing, really, compared to like my favorite movie of the year is still Across the Spider-Verse, and I think that was made for like 100, maybe 150, not 200. I know that for sure.
Right.
So it's like, where are all these movies coming from? It seems like the budget baseline for a lot of these Disney projects, especially the TV shows, like Secret Invasion was 200 million. And I'm like, where's this coming from? Like something's got to change. Something's got to give.
Something's got to give. It seems like a lot of wasted resources over there at Disney. Like obviously you want to spend enough where the creatives can do their job and they can make a quality product, right? But like you said, and I haven't seen Spider-Verse, but I saw the first one. It was amazing. But like that film was made for a lot less, and it's very much quality, So we've been shown how these other studios can make these quality films on a lesser budget. Disney can do it too. I think there's just a lot of waste going on over there. 200 million, it's crazy.
They can definitely do it, as we see with Toy Story. I don't know the budget from the OG Toy Story, but hey, it wasn't 200 million, and it's a fantastic movie.
Exactly. So, George, now, actually, George, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on? Did you see Elemental in theaters?
I saw it in theaters. Yes.
Okay, because I saw it today. Okay, so I had like all like the internet like chatter and all that stuff going on. So my expectations going into it were probably different than like yours. When you saw it in theaters, were you like kind of surprised how much you liked it, or because I was surprised how much I liked it? But I think a lot of that has to do with the expectation going in. But you saw it almost right away. So how were you with that?
Yeah, I actually went opening weekend. So I went in there. Normally, when I see a Pixar film, I'm like, okay, this is going to be great no matter what, you know. But the last few years, I'm like, okay, my expectations I'm having pretty high, and I'm walking out of the theater pretty low. Well, actually, that was, I think Elemental, I take that back, was the first Pixar movie I think I've seen in theaters since pre-Pandy. Yeah, I believe so. But I digress. Like any of the current Pixar films, it was like sort of underwhelming. I did enjoy Luca, I really did, and I did enjoy Soul. Turning Red, okay. But but so I kind of had this expectation of kind of just keeping myself again middle ground. If it was Star Wars, I'd be on the higher ground. But you know,
Yeah, exactly.
So I kept myself in the middle, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna kind of go in there, kind of like with a blank canvas, and then as I see this, I'll paint the picture of like what I'm experiencing. And actually, as watching it, it brought me back to, as I said, like that core traditional Pixar storytelling, which I thought, okay, this is a breath of fresh air, which was kind of sad in a way because the theater wasn't fully packed. You know, there were seats filled, but nothing where it was like too extravagant. It wasn't like going to see Frozen. I mean, I remember going to see Frozen. There was like not one seat available. They had people. There was standing room for that thing.
Oh my god!
Are you serious?
Oh yes, I am not kidding you. They had a packed, double booked, sold out theater. They had people that were willing to pay to stand, and I kid you not, it was the first time I've ever seen not just an animated film, but just a movie in theaters where after the movie it got a standing ovation.
That's the Frozen thing was absolutely insane. Like in 2013, that was absolutely insane. Now, Evan, did you see this in theaters or on streaming?
I did. I saw it in theaters. I think opening weekend as well. Yeah, I was excited for this one.
Okay. So you had the same kind of experience in terms of the expectations. Like you didn't get like, so I had like a couple months of like the internet kind of talking and all that. You guys went in opening weekend, so you guys.
I went in opening weekend, and you know this movie is also a product of like awful marketing, in my opinion. Where
I agree.
The marketing was showcasing. I forget his name now. The little green plant dude who was like flirting with Ember. I forget the person's name, but like it was showcasing that, like, hey Ember, how's it going? Like in all the trailers, for some reason, especially the TV spots, and I'm like, this isn't what the movie's about, especially after I saw it. But also, yeah, the marketing was just, it felt either very generic or just they were showcasing a little bit of the Ember and Wade relationship, but not going full in on the romantic comedy of it all, which I think is because they're like, hey, this is geared for kids, and kids don't like that romance comedy stuff yet. But the movie's about, and they did end up liking it, given the box office. So
yeah, no, 100%. All right, we got number 16 here. What are the stakes? The stakes. Give us the reason to root for the character. What happens if they don't succeed? Stack the odds against. So, Evan, I'll start with you. Toy Story versus Elemental. The stakes for both of these movies. Did they succeed? Not succeed? What are your thoughts on it?
Ooh, I think both of these do it well, but I think Toy Story does it a little bit more successfully. If I had to critique something against Elemental, it would be like where I felt while the stakes in terms of their relationship, are they going to work out? That was kind of felt. But if I do remember Elemental correctly, there was a whole issue with like the water dam and everything going on in this city. And I felt like the world building needed some work. There were some exterior stakes in that movie, in Elemental's case, where it was like, hey, these things are just like, there's something not right in this city. Basically, it was like a kind of a low-key segregation-esque city where it's like if you're fire, you're kind of effed. You can't live in certain areas. You can't walk in certain areas. You can't stay in certain buildings if you're fired. They're kind of like, get out of here. And it wasn't good for Ember and her family. They were living in like this one weird town area. And I figured, okay, the stakes are like, hey, the people who are from Fire, well, I forget what the place is called, but
like
Fire,
Versalia or something. I forgot the name too, but
yeah,
it's like Versacelli or something.
it wasn't good. So I'm like, okay, I think one of the things for this movie is that like as Ember and Wade get closer together, by the end of the movie, Ember and her fire people will be able to interact well with the other people in the community, with water, air, and earth, whatever. And yeah. But that never really happens. By the end of the movie, it's like she goes off to college or wherever she goes to. She goes to like a new job, and like the circumstances around her family and like the fire civilization in general doesn't really change. Which I guess is true in real life. I mean, if you're if you want to get super meta into or woke of it all, like certain aspects of the population aren't doing well, and society doesn't really care. But I don't know if that's what Elementall was gearing towards. And that was one of the main things I was kind of like interested about with Elementall that didn't really end up happening. But the personal stakes for Ember and Wade, I think, were felt. It wasn't full on. You don't need to have this world-ending stakes. I think Pixar is really good at that. They always create these emotional, personal stakes that the audiences can quickly relate to. Like in Ember and Wade's case, it was just like, hey, I hope these people will stay together. And it followed the classic rom-com route where, and I watched a lot of rom-coms. I'm a huge rom-com fan. But it followed the route where it's just like, hey, they're closer at the beginning of the movie. They're kind of like in their awkward phase. Then they realize they love each other. But then there's one secret that gets unleashed towards the third act. They can't get together, but then they realize they're dumb for not being together, and then they get together anyways. It's great. So it kind of followed that same trope, which was amazing. And then those kinds of stakes worked out. And Toy Story, again, it's very personal. The main stakes for Toy Story is, are they going to get back to Andy? We got to get back to Andy. We kind of effed up because Woody's over here trying to kill Buzz. It's caused a lot of chaos and stuff. And the personal stakes are just like, hey, is Andy going to get his toys back? Is he going to be happy again? And is Woody and Buzz internally, are they going to be able to get along? And I think Toy Story succeeds tremendously. And one of my favorite Pixar moments and memories in general, I would never forget it. It's just Woody and Buzz when they're finally accepting of each other. They're flying in above Andy's car in the third act, and Andy's in his van or whatever, and Woody and Buzz are like kind of like flying in the air with everything going on. It's amazing. I love Toy Story so much, even though Toy Story 2, I think, is my favorite. I love them so much, and I like seeing them try their best to get back together for a small thing as just, we want to make Andy happy. Those are the stakes.
Yeah.
So again, there's personal stakes that succeed so well for Toy Story.
100%. Well said. George, what are your thoughts on stakes in regards to Elementall and Toy Story?
So here's my thing. I agree with Evan. I think both films do it well. Okay. However, I see the opposite. I feel like Elementall touches upon it a little bit better than Toy Story, and I'll elaborate on that. Sort of to the points what Evan was talking about, where you have an environment of these elements that can't be together. So for me, the stakes were higher in the way, I'm just going to sound cheesy and corny, but that's what a rom-com is. For the power of love, they were willing to risk their own lives, or in this case, Wade, or even Ember, where they come to like physically touch one another, that something bad could have happened, but they were willing to allow that to happen just to have that moment, just to be able to touch one another and, with physical contact. And then also that Evan touched upon where, with the dam, if it breaks and what have you, and their business's basement gets flooded or what have you, that puts the whole family at risk. So everything that they had to do, they kind of had to kind of tiptoe around, because not even just their lives were at stake, but the townspeople could have been at stake depending on which element you were dealing with. So that's how I thought the stakes were a little bit higher compared to Toy Story, because I have a little bit of gripe about
Uh-oh.
Toy Story, primarily with Woody. Okay,
He's not great.
in in the first movie. Now, mind you, I love the Toy Story franchise. I love it.
Okay.
In the first movie, Woody does everything in his power to kind of fix the mess that he created by knocking Buzz out of the window to get back to Andy. Okay, so he created the problem for which the stakes were elevated.
Right.
After getting to Andy, that he spent so much time to convince Buzz, we got to get back to Andy. And number two, he wants to go off in some museum in China or Japan, in Japan, to a toy museum because he feels like Andy wouldn't play with him anymore. Okay, so you spent the whole entire first movie dedicating yourself to get back to the child in number two that you now are running away from. And then in number three...
You've thought about this quite a bit, George.
Oh, I thought about this whole thing. Then in number three, he wants to get himself and the toys back to Andy, the original core owner of the toys, to eventually change his mind at the end and say, you know what? I'm going to convince Andy to give all of us to Bonnie. And then when we're finally with Bonnie, then he goes off into the carnival in number four, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to 86 Bonnie and stick with Bo Peep. So my whole question is to Woody, can you make up your fucking mind of what you want?
That's great. That's great. No, I see what you're saying. Absolutely with that. Absolutely.
So now number five is going to be, okay, I'm sick of the carnival life. Let's go back to Andy, because assumingly that it's supposed to be Andy's going to have a child, and he's going to then, and then what's going to be number six? He's going to be sick of Andy's child, and it's like, okay, let's.
Yeah, right.
I get so heated over that, man. I tell you.
I know. That's funny, man.
But I do love the Toy Story franchise, and I agree with Evan. Actually, my favorite is number two as well. I don't know what it is, because you always think, when you look at the sequel to a movie, with any movie, you either want to have that expectation that it's going to be at least decent to the original, because nothing could usually beat the original. For me, number two outwits number one, and actually number two even outwits number three, and definitely number four.
I think two has like the best villain. Prospector is incredible, one of the best like Pixar villains.
Oh, absolutely. And especially because when I saw like little teaser trailers of the movie going forward, I thought they were going to make Zurg sort of like the antagonist for the whole entire movie. And then I love how they just kind of just used him as a little snippet to pay, like, as a montage to, like, Star Wars. It's like, I'm your father. And
no! That's great. That's great. So here's the thing. I kind of agree with both of you fellas in a way. Like, I think Evan, you make a great point with the stakes for Elementall, right? Like, I think that the potential there was really, really strong with Elementall, but I agree with you, Evan. They didn't really stick the landing though with the world building though, because like you said, the fire people's lives didn't change, and the whole time I was thinking like, okay, at the end, the people are going to come out and say, hey, we can interact with fire and water, and it's not going to be a problem. Wade and Ember proved it, and you never had any of that, And that was, to me, that they didn't really stick the landing with that. They should have had that moment at the end, absolutely. Now, the stakes were really high. So I agree with you, George, where the stakes were really high. I mean, like you said, they literally risked their lives to touch hands, I mean, that's big. That's really big,
I mean, it's not like that they were out in the big open ocean where you had one piece of wood where you can fit two people on. I mean, God forbid.
Yeah. Go ahead, Evan.
But there's that one fantastic scene, probably the best scene in Elementall for me, where they're like, Wade kind of like sacrifices himself with Ember in that one fire room or whatever, I think at her house. And it's very emotional. I'm like, oh shoot, like he's like actually disappearing. Granted, I knew he was going to come back somehow. But it was still emotional.
And yet that's funny you say that, because even though I knew that too, I was trying to figure out how. Like while it
Yeah.
was happening, I'm like, how in the world are they going to get out of this one? Like, and then I mean, I knew Pixar would find a way; they'd always find a way. But it was like in that moment, and I love movies like that, where it's
Yeah.
like where you kind of know the route it's already going, but you don't necessarily know how it's going to get there.
Right,
Exactly.
100%. And the stakes for Toy Story were high too, though. I mean, it was like Andy is, their whole world. I mean, it's like everything revolves around Andy. And,
Well,
and
apparently everyone but Woody. But it's like,
yeah, exactly. So they were at risk losing that whole thing. So it was interesting. I think I would probably, who would I give it to? I'd probably give it to Toy Story for the stakes, but just by a little bit. If Elemental would have stuck that landing, I think I probably would have gone there, but they just didn't stick it for me.
And it's interesting for a Toy Story, where I think audiences, I can only speak for myself, but I become so connected with Andy, and Andy is like kind of, I don't want to say he's a periphery character, but he's not even the main character in Toy Story. It's all about the toys, Woody, Buzz, etc., the whole gang. And Andy's kind of like the kid who just runs upstairs and downstairs, with his mom who has the same model as Andy, which is, growing up is very weird. You see like the model of Andy's mom, and it's just like, isn't it like a boy's face? And it's really weird. Anyways, and like we care about Andy because we care about what these toys think of Andy. So it's a very interesting relationship that we have with Andy, where we're like, they got to get back to Andy, but we're only so invested because of what Woody and Buzz and them are going through.
which I do have to say, like the human characters of like the early stages of Pixar were really freaky looking. I have to say, like they look like the characters from the new Freddy movie.
Five Nights at
Five
Freddy's.
Nights at Freddy's. Like they have like those same like expressions, like the big giant eyes and the creepy smile. It was like, oh man.
Well, that's one thing about CGI. Not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but that's one thing about CGI. Where if you look at hand-drawn animation, right, you can watch a movie like Snow White from the 1930s, and it looks great. I mean, obviously she has a different style than the princesses now, right? With her eyes were smaller and it's very different style, but it still looks good. CGI, that early CGI did not age well at all. I mean, some of that early Pixar stuff with the human characters, especially, it didn't age very well. They looked a little wonky, but they've moved past it, so it's all good now. So let's move on to number 19. Coincidences to get characters into trouble are great. Coincidences to get them out of it are cheating. This is interesting. This is very, very interesting. I know I was watching with Elementall today. I did notice a little bit of that in this movie, but thoughts on coincidences, Evan?
I agree. This is interesting. I think from a, writing standpoint, I think what the gist of this storytelling rule is trying to get at is, as a writer, as a creator, it doesn't matter how you get to your inciting incident. All stories need your inciting incident for the characters to get into trouble, to create the drama. It can be as little as, a toy falling out of a window. And then there you go. Your story's going forward from there. But after that point, audiences, as we talked about, they get invested. They get invested in the story. They start creating their own, like, okay, how is this going to end? How is this going to get resolved? Once you have your audiences hooked, you need to find a creative way that thematically and in the entertaining sense works for how they get out of it. If it's just an easy cop-out, if it's an easy just like, oh, well, la-di-do-da-day, they saved the day, then you're kind of like, well, it's kind of underwhelming. That's why a lot of reviews for movies, you hear like, oh, it was good until the third act. You hear that a lot these days, where it's, oh, it was great until the third act, which is kind of a cop-out if you're a critic or whatever, but it happens a lot, where I think it's easy for writers to just kind of create a lackadaisical ending, but it's more worthwhile, as the rule says here, if it's not cheating, if it's a more fulfilling ending. To bring this back to Pixar, I think coincidences to getting your characters into trouble, kind of like with Woody and Buzz. It's very simple. Two dudes who just don't get along, they get into trouble, they cause your inciting incident. But how do they get out of it? It's more interesting. You have to create a whole story arc for Buzz and a whole story arc for Woody in terms of like how they are changing amongst each other. You create this whole storyline with Buzz realizing he can't fly. You know, add this with the whole Randy Newman song, and you get so invested in his whole story. Same thing for Woody. Kind of like these two parallel journeys. Once they intersect, once they kind of meld, then they kind of create their own solution together, and it's a very worthwhile journey. And it's not cheating when they, come across different toys and different means of escaping. What was his name?
Sid.
That creepy. Speaking of creepy CGI character, that guy is nightmare fuel for like 1999. I was scared shitless in that movie.
If that was my child, man, I'd be slapping the doctor.
Right? But it's very coincidental. Like they come across some toys and then they manage to escape, but it's fulfilling again because of the journeys that Woody and Buzz went through to get there. And I think Elementall succeeds as well, where it's not really coincidence. Kind of like what we talked about with the big triumphant scene or sad scene between Ember and Wade, where Wade nearly sacrifices himself to help out Ember in her journey of just like accepting the weight of her family's whole journey and her whole history and moving forward and that kind of stuff. I don't think there are any shortcuts in this movie that I can remember. So I think both of them are pretty successful at this.
100%. Yeah, the Elementall was interesting. They took the crying game from Wade's family, and they utilized that at the end to bring Wade back. I thought that was very clever. That was interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
that whole thing. I thought that was cool. I think that worked. It felt very like, okay, that makes sense. I'm fine with that kind of stuff as long as if it makes sense. Like, okay, one of the coincidences though in Elementall that were kind of a little weird for me was like when Wade was like explaining like the pipe situation, like, oh, I was in there and I got stuck, and then all of a sudden. Ember, she blows her top, she goes crazy, and then it dislodged, and then he went through. It was just too many things, like too many coincidences, basically happening all together. That was a little bit weird. I think that might have been like the most, the most glaring example of this. But yeah, overall, I think both of these movies, the coincidences or the things that occur in like Toy Story and Elementall, I think they happen, but they make sense. They feel organic. They don't feel forced, contrived. Like, oh, geez, that feels so far fetched. Like in Toy Story, like you were saying, Evan, like they come across other toys that help them and what have you. That feels like that would be the case. It doesn't feel too much of a stretch to think that would happen in a situation like that. What do you think, George, in terms of coincidences for Elementall and Toy Story?
Yeah, I think both films do it very well. I feel like Toy Story does it a little more better.
Okay.
Off of Elementall. Speaking of which, I also too did the crying game the first time I seen the movie Ishtar because I just wanted that damn thing to end.
I never saw it, so I can't comment on it. But it must have been pretty bad. Huh?
It's bad. Don't waste your hours. But I digress. With Elementall, I feel like it was a little bit like as Evan mentioned, like at the end of how to get that for Wade to sacrifice himself and Ember, bringing him back or what have you, to get to that point, it felt a little bit kind of. I don't want to say stale, but it just took a longer process to kind of figure out which path the movie was going. Even though, again, I still enjoyed the movie, but we're comparing it to Toy Story, I feel like it flowed nicely with the different layers, so to speak, of the film, where, again, you have Buzz and Woody, Woody knocks Buzz out the window, what have you. Then they wind up in Pizza Planet. Then they end up in Sid's house, trying to escape Sid's house. You have them chasing the moving truck, essentially being blasted up with a rocket, and then Buzz actually, flying, what have you. So I feel like that the coincidences that you all had also mentioned, OG, it was very well apparent. It was like, okay, it's like all there at once, where with Toy Story, I felt like it kind of like flowed nicely, whereas like you can stretch out the story where it's like, okay, you don't really know what's going to go on, but it's like, okay, we're going to see like a coincidence coming up, you know, but they spread it out very, very well.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Now this is our last question because the 21 and 22 are for the creators and it's a little inside baseball. But number 20, I want to ask you guys this one. This could be very interesting. Okay, this is actually inside baseball, but I'm going to actually convert it to something that we could actually talk about. It says here, take the building blocks of a movie you dislike. How do you rearrange them into what you do like? So Evan, I'll ask you, like okay, let's take Pixar films, right? You could pick any Pixar film that you don't like. What would you do to that Pixar film that you don't like? How would you alter that film to make it a film that would resonate with you more?
I like this one. The first thing I can think of is Onward. I can't stand Onward. It stinks. It's weird because this is a movie that I should kind of like. I have a twin brother. I have a brother. And I like movies that can get into like brotherly relationships. I'm like, okay, we got two brothers here played by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt. Two great actors, not the best voice actors, admittedly, but they're two great actors. Like, so they have great chemistry in live action. They should have good chemistry in animation. Not these characters, not likable, not interesting. I didn't care about their journey, and I think for me, the world building needed a lot of work. I love the world building in Elementall. I think it's very interesting. I don't think, like I said earlier, I don't think it goes all the way with like what it could have achieved towards the end, but it was trying to say something, and I liked that. And Onward, I have no freaking clue what the world was about. It was just, but it had some fantastical fantasy elements mixed in with modern day, and that's a cool idea. So I think the thing I'll start off there with the movie I don't like in Onward is, first of all, create a better brotherly relationship. It starts off with where you have an older brother, Chris Pratt's character. He's older, so he's already lived his life a little bit. He's kind of not dejected, but he's kind of a lazy, uninspired older brother compared to Tom Holland's character, the main character, who has more of a sense of dreams and he wants to go places, sense of adventure, etc. And it doesn't really go anywhere between them. Their arcs don't really meld in a way. It was just weird because I think a lot of my friends, they watched it. They're like, "Oh, I cried at the end of this movie," and I'm shocked because for me, I'm like, I couldn't get in. I couldn't become invested. I couldn't become immersed in their respective arcs for that when they come together and they realize the love that they have between each other. And they're like, "Hey, you are a good brother." Like, I don't feel anything by the end of the movie. So I think it just created a better world, make it a better sense of adventure for them, which is weird. I remember seeing or hearing about the Onward tease. I think somebody was at D23 the year before Onward came out. And there was a clip of them, the two brothers, trying to, I think in Onward. Have you guys seen Onward?
Yeah.
Is the main premise like they're trying to get their father back or something like that?
Correct.
And as a huge anime fan, there's this anime called Full Metal Alchemist, where these two brothers try to resurrect their mother. And I'm like, okay, these two brothers trying to resurrect their father. I'm like, I wonder if these creators have watched Full Metal Alchemist. But either way, it's a very traumatic scene because they fail. And they're not able to fully resurrect their father. I think in Onward, they only resurrect like his pants or something.
Yeah, his legs.
And it's pretty horrific, and there's something you can mine there. It's like they're trying to bring their father back to life. They kind of failed there. And I'm like, whoa, like this is some deep stuff. Like somebody's dead trying to resurrect him because they miss him so much. The movie does jack shit with it, in my opinion. Like they play it off more so for comedy that eventually tries to grow into something more emotional. So again, I think just create better world building, create better stakes with like the father and just what's going on there, and most of all, create better brotherly relationships, which I think a lot of Pixar movies do so well. They create the two. We talked about this in our last stream, where the two main characters of each Pixar movie, the successful ones, are so well defined. People remember like the characters in Monsters Inc. and Toy Story and WALL-E for their dual character journeys, their dual arcs that people can get invested in. And I think Onward kind of fails there. They missed out on those key building blocks, for me at least.
I agree with you on that. I mean, when you think of a brother film, you would think the connection between the two characters would be all more greater, all powerful.
Yes.
And when you can have a film where a clumsy, upcoming, soon to be chef has a better relationship with a rat than two brothers, like you're doing something terribly wrong with your story arc there.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
well said, well said. Yeah, I agree with you both. I didn't love that movie at all. And for all the reasons you guys talked about, but also even aesthetically, I felt it looked kind of. Look, I expect a lot from Disney and Pixar in animation. They are really a cut above all the other studios, and this one felt a little bit like maybe like a DreamWorks movie or something else. It didn't feel like a Pixar movie to me. It looked a little cheap, you know. I agree with you, Evan. I think they could have done better with the world building. There's an interesting concept there with that world, the kind of the magical creatures, that kind of. There's something there they can really mine and really get into. It just didn't live up to that potential at all. And I gotta be honest, like I don't know, like the I think it's Chris Pratt's character, the big brother, you know?
Yeah.
I just found him to be kind of obnoxious, to be honest.
Yes. Yes. He's so annoying. I'm like, I can't get into his. And I know his archetype, where it's like, it's the annoying older brother, but then you realize deep down, just like he realizes he's a failure and he's trying to be a good older brother to his younger brother, but it fails dramatically because I do not care about his character.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. George, what Pixar movie out of any of them would you change, and how would you change it to make it a better movie?
Well, as much as I do agree with Evan, I'm not a fan of Onward. I actually got to see that in theaters. That was the last film I got to see before the pandy and what have you. The only positive thing I could think about it for that movie was it was for Josh's birthday, so we kind of did like a package deal at the movie theater for him and his friends. So I ended up getting free nachos out of it. So that's basically, the only positive thing I could think out of it. But for me, I'd have to go with Turning Red.
Really?
I'm sorry,
Wow.
like I tried for that film. First of all, like even when I was in high school and middle school, like pre-adolescent teenage girls or even teenage girls, they just like got on my nerves. So to actually watch a whole entire movie of this, it was like cringeworthy to me. Like I can't. And forgive me for all of you out there who have teenage girls like that have like that whatever sort of type of thing. Like
The Valley Girl thing?
The Valley Girl thing. Yeah. Like I just can't. And I get the type of message that they were trying to convey, but I just felt like the storyline was flat for me. Like if you asked me like any of the characters' names, I couldn't even tell you. At least I could probably name one character from Onward, but Turning Red, I couldn't name you any character. That's just how I have only watched it once, and once was enough for me. It just felt like the movie was just like all over the place. It was like you had these girls that are wanting to go to see this boy band, and her mother wouldn't let her go. Anytime she would get angry or upset, she'd turn into this giant red panda that's part of her heritage that her mother and her grandmother, had and whatever. Then they kind of go into this like offbeat world where there's like an out of body experience and everything. And I don't know. I just couldn't get it. So for me, and that's how much that I could try to describe. If someone asked me, can you fully describe Turning Red? That's probably the best way I can. Cause it's like, I can't.
Well, is there anything that okay? So you can change the movie to make it a good one.
Okay, so how I would change?
Like what would you change or alter that would make this movie kind of more resonate with you personally?
Okay, probably for me, take the reel of film, get a thing of gasoline, pour it over, light a match.
Oh my God!
Oh jeez.
No. What I honestly probably I do love them trying to have like that mother-daughter relationship, because like when a girl hits to a certain age, that she kind of tends to separate herself from her parents. And I think like with a mother, you know, they want to have that relationship with their daughter. They're you know, they're kind of begging for it and what have you. But it's like then the child then kind of comes back and then appreciates the mother. So I like that aspect. I would have focused more on that, making that more of the core than them like kind of like scatterbrained all over, you know, talking about a boy band or talking about this or that. Like, I don't know. Like, I would have had more of the storyline a little bit more controlled.
Okay.
Where it has just like one tone trying to run through the storyline. Because I feel like, not really in a bad way, of how Turning Red feels to me is like how the newer generation is. And we talked about this, OG, on several other shows where like with kids today, it's like you got to give them like increments of things. It's like if you stretch something out too much, they lose interest. So it's like you give them like a little snip, a little snip, little snip, and it's like just to keep them going. That's where I feel like Turning Red did. It was like it was just all over the place because it felt like that it applied for the newer generation of kids, but like for someone like me who is like traditional old school type of thing, I'm like watching this, I'm like, okay, I can't read this for shit. I can't, I don't get it. It's like for me, Turning Red is the worst Pixar film ever, period. No pun intended.
Jeez, George. Here's the thing with Turning Red is I think there's a lot in that movie that I actually did enjoy. Like I think the whole aesthetics of it, like with the giant red panda, I love that. The character designs and that. The overall idea, like you were saying, George, I love the mother and daughter thing. I think that's beautiful. But there were things I didn't care for. Like I do feel like they were sort of like
they felt like filters. They felt like filters to me, where it was like, we don't really know how more so to stretch this film, so let's just kind of like throw this in there.
Oh, filler.
And let's throw, yeah, they felt like filters, like it was just like, not filters, I'm sorry, like fill-ins. Fill-ins that's just like, okay, we can't really figure out what to do here, so let's just kind of put this here just for the sake of doing it.
Well, I think for me, I think my biggest issue with that film was there was a great concept in there. I think that for me, it was just, I feel like, because it was tailored towards that age group, right? It wasn't made, honestly, it wasn't for us at all, really. It was for that young teenage girl that's going through that, you know? But I think because they knew that was the audience, that was the demo, they sort of did this very like, kind of like, like you were saying, George, a hyperactive storytelling, where it's very like flashy and fast. And I think maybe for older guys like us, maybe it just doesn't resonate as much, you know? But I think, yeah, I mean, I didn't love that movie either, to be honest with you. There were pieces of it, like I said, I did enjoy, but overall, but I would have to probably say my number one worst Pixar I would have to say is Onward as well. I got to go with Evan on that. I think that it was just, I didn't like that brother. I didn't like that brother. And I think the world they built was okay. They could have done a better job with it. It felt a little Shrekky to me or something. I don't know. This is weird.
It had potential. Like, it's the combination of mythology with the modern world. And I'm like,
see, that's where I was intrigued by it. Because I was like, oh, we're going to get this action-packed adventure. And it ended up turning into like an animated version of Weekend at Bernie's.
That's a great way to put it, George. That's brilliant. That's exactly what it was. Exactly. Yeah. Now, George. Now, we finished our list, but George, I think you wanted to touch upon just like our last little segment. I don't even know what you wanted to talk about, but if you want to set the table about the movie Cars, I guess you want to get some stuff off your chest.
Yeah. So for me, more so than I already did about Woody and Turning Red. Right. So it's like I'm on a roll here. For me, because we were in the group discussion before doing this show, and we were trying to figure out which films to kind of discuss and compare to. Right. And Jay had mentioned Cars as one of them, but we all kind of figured, you know what, Elementall and Toy Story, that would be a great kind of mix going back and forth. But I did want to just touch upon Cars just a little bit, more so in a positive sense, actually. Because, and when I say Cars, I only mean the first one.
Okay. Yeah, the only one I can remember, because I've seen Cars 2, whatever that was. But then I've never seen Cars 3, so that's
Okay.
a blind
Well,
spot.
I will say Cars 3 is okay. Like, I can see you watching number 1 and then going to number 3. Like, 2 has, like, no relevance to the storyline whatsoever. But anyway, so just speaking of number 1, I know a lot of people kind of have mixed feelings and mixed reviews of the film itself because they feel like it's a little bit too cartoony. You know, it doesn't really have to do with, like, like of how a car would actually react and what have you, or I know people have their weird reviews, but anyway, but what I always took out of Cars, and I kind of use this terminology a lot, which I have gotten out of that film, and it's the one quote I take is actually from John Lasseter himself when he was making Cars. It's not about the destination, it's the journey. So I always like to use that just in with everyday life, and he actually kind of infused that within the film. That the destination is always nice, but it's like, how did you get to that point? Where did you come from? Where are you going? And I feel like that is more. I find Cars as a much stronger Pixar film than it kind of leads on to, because you just think, okay, it's a cartoony Cars, what have you,
Right.
You have Mater, played by Larry the Cable Guy. It's like, what can you really get out of it? But then just the character arc of Lightning McQueen himself, like when you see this character, he's very arrogant, he's very, uptight, he's like full of himself, and it's like, okay, how can I like this character? Like, how can I see anything in common with him? And as the film progresses, you see him kind of morphing into a personality, so to speak, like like a character that gains a heart, that
Right.
ends up gaining feelings for others. It's not just about himself, and you see that with his relationship with Sally and the other members of Radiator Springs, and then him purposely like losing the race at the very end and pushing the king to win his final race before he retires. To me, that is, I feel like, one of the greatest Pixar arcs, that you literally watch the transition of this character
Right.
from being a completely arrogant jerk
Yeah.
to someone that you could say, okay, now I could see why he's the main character. And I always found that, and I wanted to touch upon that because a lot of people kind of say, comparing to Wall-E or Ratatouille or even Up and The Incredibles, it's like
Right.
Cars falls flat. But for me, just sometimes it's like you have to actually sit back and really watch a movie to get the full message. And that was a message I wanted to bring out since we were talking about Pixar, because a lot of people don't really think about that film as like a touch and go, so to speak.
They don't. You think of Cars, you think of a summer blockbuster movie, made a lot of money, right? It did great. It was awesome. But a lot of people don't consider it like what you were saying, George, where you break it down like that. I don't really see that kind of like analysis for that movie in particular. You see it with Up, you see it with these other movies, but not that one. And you're right. I mean, that arc that he has from the beginning, that character he was at the beginning compared to the character he was at the end, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Another thing I love about that movie actually is Mater. I mean, how do you not love this guy? He is such a lovable character. He's such a good friend. I fall every time we go to California Adventure and I see that guy. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta take a picture.
and I think that's where Pixar thought, you know what, he is so lovable. Let's give him his own film. Let's let him be the forefront of Cars 2. It doesn't work. I'm sorry. He's great as the sidekick. He's great as the number 2. He is not. He's no Tom Cruise. He's no leading man.
No leading man. What are your thoughts?
It's the same thing they did with Dory, where it's like, oh, Dory, so people love Dory. Let's make her the head of a sequel, Finding Dory. And it's like, yeah, I totally forget that movie happened.
Yeah, and really quick before I get your take on Cars, Evan. How many freaking times in Finding Dory can you literally hear the term kelp cake? Like, that's all you hear throughout the whole entire movie is like her dad referring to her as kelp cake, kelp cake, kelp cake. Like, it's cute, but it's like you don't need to hear it throughout the whole entire fucking movie. It's like it gets obnoxious after.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Evan.
The comedy's not great in Finding Dory, but yeah, Cars is a movie that I respect. It's a very interesting that you chose this one because it follows a very simple storyline. This is a character that goes from the classic, not zero to hero, but a hero to zero to hero again. And where he's not necessarily a hero at the beginning of the movie, but he has all the skills, but then he loses those skills in a sense where he gets kind of like, relegated to this outskirts place, but then he has to humble himself. And I love a good humbling story where he starts to realize, like, hey, all those good things don't really matter. It's about the connections that you make. And that's a classic Pixar trope, right?
Yeah.
It's like understanding the loved ones around you, understanding the connections, the people that you have around you. We talked about Toy Story today. Woody's journey is kind of similar to whatever the main character's name is in Cars. I forget his name now. But
McQueen.
Lightning McQueen, thank you. Where it's like, hey, Woody's the hot shit at the beginning of the movie, but then he's not. He gets humbled. When Buzz comes in, he's the hot shit. So then Woody has to have this whole arc about like acceptance and accepting his role in things. And I think in Lightning McQueen's place, he learned his role in the movie is to help people, not just to put himself first, is to help put others before you, especially people who are, of the older generation. Help the people, help the elderly, help the people ahead of you. It's kind of like the same quote that I love from the first Doctor Strange movie. It's not all about you. I love that quote, and I think it's very relevant to what goes on in Cars, where, hey, Lightning, it's not all about you. Learn to accept your role in society and move on from there. It's a very deep movie. Again, it's a simple trope, but it's very complex the way to go about it in Cars. I think Cars is very underrated. It's not in my top 10 Pixar, but it's a very underrated movie, and I respect the journey, and I respect the pick here from George.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, George, was that your favorite Pixar movie of all time, or is it just
No,
it ranks
actually,
high? Or?
actually, being that Evan said that, I don't even think really it is in my
In your
top
top?
10. I don't think, maybe top 10, but definitely not like the top 5. But that's what's so strange about Cars in a good way. You would think that would be in like my top 5 because of that, but again, it's just the messaging. Like, it's not in my top 5. It may not even be in my top 10, but just that message alone of how you have this character. And I say this all the time too. He was basically insecure with himself without even showing it. It was like a complete curtain that he's like hiding behind. And as I always say, it like insecurity creates an arrogance. And boy, I mean, I've been affiliated with a lot of people with that notion, but I mean, at least Lightning McQueen could be kind of like relatable and likable as the movie transitions on, because it's, again, I'm like, because I did see, I think I saw that actually in the drive-in, believe it or not, when it first came out. And I'm like watching this and I'm like, oh man, this guy is like, he's like Gaston, like coming up, like he's like full of himself. He's like, it's like, he could do no wrong. But I love, again, that character arc of the transition of him, becoming a likable character.
Right.
And it's like, he's kind of putting his guard down and just allowing himself to be himself without the pressure of the glitz and glamour of being a hot shot race car.
Yeah.
Going back to the MCU, Lightning also has the similar trope as Iron Man, right? Where it's like, and I think Iron Man, Woody, Lightning, they all have these things where it's like they hide behind their benevolence. They're so loved. Woody's so loved by Andy. Tony's so loved by like his fans and everything, and same thing for Lightning. Like, hey, I'm so loved, I must be great. But deep down, like George said, they're actually hiding their insecurities in a way. And the movie does a great job of peeling that away until the third act. Good stuff.
Yeah. And Evan, I wanted to ask you, I know this isn't park related, but have you ever been to Disneyland?
That's the
Disney
California one? No.
Okay. If you ever get the chance to, if you go to Disney California Adventure, whether you're a fan of the Cars film or not, you would have to check out Cars Land. Because
there's a Cars Land?
Yes. Oh yeah. Should I bring it up for him?
Bring it up for him.
Please do.
This land is so immersive. You would think you're literally walking into the movie. And it's just the atmosphere, the sights, the smells, the sounds, the attractions. especially Radiator Springs Racers. I mean, you take any angle of this land because they have like several entrances to this, and it's like you would think it's not man-made. You would think like it
Wow.
was actually already existent, and they just built a Disney park around it.
That's cool. I didn't even make a trip because I was just over at Anaheim last year for Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim, and I didn't have time to go over to Disneyland. A lot of my friends did, but I never did. Holy crap!
So that's the attraction. You ride in these little cars, they zoom around. I mean, it's all full scale, like massive rock work everywhere. It's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's incredible. And then at night, they light it up, like the little town and everything.
Holy
But
cow!
it's impressive. It's really impressive. Yeah, I mean, if you're a fan of the movie, I mean...
And then, OG, can you click on one more photo?
Sure.
The one entrance way that you come from the side with the arch.
Oh, right here?
Yeah, that one.
I mean, it's insane. The rock work.
Wow. How big is Disneyland? Oh, God.
It's growing.
It's, yeah.
Now, DCA is how big, OG?
75 acres? Yeah. Yeah, the next door Disneyland, I think it's like 85 or 90, something like that. So it's decent size. I mean, it's not Florida. Orlando's got like, they're like pretty much the entire like Central Florida. that whole piece of Central, that's all Florida. But we got a decent sized little piece out here. But Evan, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's always a good time talking with you, man. It's always fun.
Yeah, this is super fun because I think as a huge Pixar fan, it's very interesting seeing, and box office fan, it's very interesting seeing how the box office and how the reception to Pixar has changed over time. As George said, the pandy, it really did a number on Pixar. And I think a lot of it had to do with the horrible decision making that went over there with like how they released these movies. Granted, it was out of their control at times, but they gave a lot of grace to the Disney films like Raya and other films, but like Soul got the shit end of the stick, pardon my language there, where I love Soul. I adore Soul.
Me too.
Yeah, I do too. Soul should have, and I think Soul would have done much better had they would have advertised that much better and just did it in a much better way where it was.
Because I think there was an animated movie. Soul came out December 2021, right? Or 2020, I forget now. But
I think it was December 2020.
2020. I think there was some kind of, and that was like the heat of the pandemic. But I think there were other animated movies that like had a limited theatrical run there. That I think Soul would have benefited from. I think Soul, because I think it's just a magnificent film. I was tearing up by the end of Soul. I was like, oh, this movie it speaks to me. I remember making my 2020 ranking. I'm like, 2020's been all right for movies, but then Soul came out. I'm like, this is the best movie of 2020.
See, for me, I would have rather them hold back on Soul and just like waited for like the appropriate moment, because I feel like that movie would have done major success. I mean, more than what it already has. Like, I think it would have gotten more recognition than what it has, and it should have gotten more than what it deserved.
I think so too.
Oh, me too. Yeah, I love that movie. And Pixar is really, really good at taking these really kind of crazy concepts. I mean, you have a jazz musician who passes away, right? I mean, you would think like that's dark. That's a really dark concept, But you're gonna make that a movie that all like families can go to. But they did it, and they did it beautifully. Same with like Up, right? You have this Boy Scout and this elderly man going on this adventure together. It's like, how is that going to work? And it works beautifully. Pixar is so good at this. They're so good at this.
So yeah, like I'm so happy that Elementall ended up making like I think north of 500 million, which is insane. Given like it opened up with like 23 million. And I say this to say like I just remembered in 2024 we were going to have Elio, which is like the boy who starts communicating with aliens. And the aliens get their first introduction to Earth via Elio. And I think it's been very interesting seeing the marketing for that. But Elio has been moved from 2024 to 2025 due to the SAG strikes and the unfortunate strikes going on right now. Pay your actors, producers. But anyways, I think a lot of the buzz that Elementall helped build with the reception towards Pixar might be disappearing with Elio's, departure. Now, granted, We do have Inside Out 2 still coming out, presumably next summer. So the buzz is still going to be there for Pixar. Granted, that's because it's a beloved, it's a sequel to a beloved film. I love Inside Out.
Yeah.
So I'm hopeful that Pixar, can continue the reins. Despite this being a sequel, I'm happy that Pixar still is moving forward here. But I'm excited for the more original stuff. I was so excited to see Elio because it's original, and I want to see the originality continue with this Pixar.
And I agree with you, Evan. I feel like, although I am excited to see Inside Out 2, it's characters and story that we are already aware of. We can already relate to that. So we already kind of know, going into seeing this film, it's like, okay, this is a hype that has been there before. With an original concept, it's like we're going in there like we did with Elementall, a blank canvas, and we got to paint our way through. And it's like those are the films that I feel like are telling of how Pixar is going to move forward, because you can take any successful film. I mean, Lord, we're getting a number 5 Toy Story movie. Like when we thought number 3 was going to be the end of it. Like it was like, how can you top number 3? No, we get number 4, and now we're going to get number 5. So it's like, I mean, pretty soon there's going to be the same amount of Toy Stories as there is Star Wars movies.
Yeah. Yeah, there will be. Well, and here's the thing too. It's like these studios, like Disney or like DreamWorks, all these animation houses, and even like the live action studios and all that, they're really hesitant with like an original concept because it's risky. It's way riskier. You put that thing out there, you don't know if it's going to do well or not. Like Strange World, brand all original concept, and it flopped. But like a sequel to an Inside Out is a proven thing, right? Like people love the first one, so there's a built-in audience there, But here's the thing: if anyone from the studios are watching this, yes, it's riskier to release original content, but the reward is also bigger though when you do, because if you do an Elio and that movie hits theaters and that crushes in theaters, now you have a whole nother franchise you can farm out, right? Basically, you can milk it. When you do Inside Out 2 and Toy Story 5, it's the same. It's the same cow. Basically, you're milking the same cow with these new original concepts. You could potentially have a whole new franchise if it does well. So it's riskier, but the reward is way higher.
And if you're speaking of Toy Story as comparing to a cow, they should have shot that cow 10 years ago.
I agree. Yeah. But I'm very excited for the future of Pixar and where we're going. But once again, you guys can find me on Twitter at HarrisEV9. Yesterday, I did a commentary of The Mist. On Saturday, Nathan and I did a 2 hours and 40-minute podcast going over Loki Season 2, Episodes 3 and 4 in detail, because I'm having so much fun with Loki Season 2. It's so great. Only 6 episodes, but each episode is filled to the brim with a lot of great storytelling ideas and thoughts. And then we also discussed the wonderful Gen V. If people aren't watching that, there's a show called Gen V. It's a spinoff of The Boys on Amazon Prime Video. Ooh. It is fantastic. Fantastic. Awesome. I love it so much. It's very crazy. It's not, it's not safe for, your Pixar loving kids or whatever, but it's a very adult and mature and fun, super entertaining show. So if you like The Boys, I really recommend watching Gen V. And starting this week, Invincible is back. Invincible Season 2 returns, and we'll be doing weekly thoughts and recaps over Invincible as well. So yeah, follow me at HarrisEV9 for everything fun and like Invincible, Gen V, Loki, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. And I, like I said, I will link all his socials down in the description. Make sure you follow, subscribe, and show all the love to Evan. And Evan, you are always welcome back. We're going to have you on again soon. We'll talk whether it's MCU.
Oh, I already have an idea.
There you go. See, George is already working it. He's already working
it. Love it.
George, if you can let everybody home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Absolutely. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Disney George. You could also find me on the podcast, A Walk with Walt. You could also find me on Instagram under the Disney Italiano. And, of course, you'll find me here on my home base at Orange Grove 55 with Citrus Corner with all that sweet, juicy, but sometimes sticky Disney news and info.
There we go. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining today. And Jay will be back. He is working on his short film, so he's been really super busy lately. Absolutely. But he will be back. on Story Geeks, and we'll talk shop with Jay. And comment down below with everything that we talked about today, whether it be Pixar, whether it be Elementall, Toy Story, Cars, anything you want to discuss, comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye, everybody.